I'd like to share an ancient reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 16, verses 1 through 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. This is a jasmine plant. I bought it at Trader Joe's back in February, just in time for Mardi Gras. I know that Easter lilies are usually the flower that is associated with Easter. That's the name, Easter lilies. And I'm not really sure what they have to do with resurrection, but I do know about jasmine. As many of you know, groups of First Parishers went down every April vacation week to New Orleans for over a decade to help with the rebuilding work after Hurricane Katrina and then subsequent storms that left massive flood damage not only in the city, but to the surrounding parishes and Baton Rouge. And I've shared before how I learned about the difference between rebirth and resurrection at a visceral level through these trips. Rebirth happens in the natural order of things. Spring follows winter. The dormant plants emerge from the earth, trees bud, birds return to build their nests and lay their eggs, filling the air with song. Even in the coldest, longest nights of winter, we do know that spring will come, even if it's hard to believe, especially when that major snowstorm comes in March. But even then, even when I was shoveling out my driveway in March, I felt the difference, the sun on my shoulders. It was warmer than in December or January. And this is one of the things I actually appreciate mostly about being a New Englander, that we have seasons, that I can feel the difference in the sun. I can smell spring in the air. I hear the birds singing in the morning, however cold it might be, because they know that this is the season of song. The first few years we went to New Orleans, the people we met were focused on surviving. Only in the first steps of what I came to understand is the long process of resurrection there. The destruction of the flooding was overwhelming, and vast swaths of the city and surrounding parishes remained uninhabited. Our group would come and we'd do our little part. We'd drywall a house here, we'd paint another house there, and we listened. We listened to stories. We walked the neighborhoods of ruined empty houses, blown manhole covers, broken sidewalks, and jasmine. Jasmine was in bloom everywhere with this sweet scent. And for me, very tired of waiting for our New England winter to end, to finally let go, this scent of jasmine always lifted my spirits. I think I embarrassed my son, Sam, when I would lean in to jasmine plants and just breathe them in. It was so beautiful. And each year we went down, we saw a little bit more progress had been made. Around year 5 or 6, I noticed that people in the city had shifted from surviving to looking ahead, imagining a future again. And that's when I understood the difference between rebirth and resurrection, and why I associate it with jasmine. I know that many of us Unitarian Universalists have a hard time with the story of Jesus' resurrection because, let's face it, it's not rational. Maybe you feel that way. Or maybe because you attended a church where you were told that you had to believe this irrational, impossible story was a fact, that it happened just the way the Bible reported it, and that your salvation depended upon you believing that fact, and you couldn't. Or maybe you were told that the story is just a story, a fairy tale, and can be dismissed. It doesn't mean anything. If resurrection is irrational, if it cannot be proven, then it's not worth celebrating. And that's fine too. Part of being a Unitarian Universalist community is accepting that we will not all agree on the meaning of a sacred story. But it's interesting to note that the Bible doesn't tell the story of Jesus' resurrection in just one way. The story evolves with each gospel as the different communities who followed Jesus came to understand the resurrection's meaning. Mark's gospel is the oldest, and in the oldest version of this oldest gospel, the story ends with everyone afraid. Everyone unsure what had happened, unsure what resurrection of Jesus meant. All of Jesus' disciples fled in fear. They were still in the ashes of his death, believing that everything was over for them, that everything that Jesus had taught them about God's love and loving one's neighbor and embodying beloved community died with him on that cross. But then something shifted, and we don't know what that was. It's a mystery. But something shifted for them, and they found each other again. And they found Jesus again. And they found God's love embodied among them again, embodied by them. Their fear and their grief were transformed by love. By a love that they perhaps didn't fully understand or recognize, but a love who called them back to life, back into beloved community. I know from my years in ministry and just being a human being that terrible things happen, that life is not fair, that death ends more than the life of a person we love. It brings with it a whole host of changes that can challenge our very trust in life itself. On top of that, we're living in pretty chaotic and irrational times, a time when many people see rainbows and books as more dangerous than automatic weapons, where the climate change is making itself felt through wildfires and floods and intense storms of all kinds, where we are just beginning to emerge from a 3-year pandemic that kept us at a distance from one another, adding another layer of anxiety to an already anxious time. Choose your metaphor: a time of ashes, a time of the tomb, a mud season, a time of goo. In any case, the future is not clear. When we're in the ashes, the mud, the goo, the tomb, it can be hard to imagine anything but what we're surrounded by. Jan Richardson has a lovely Easter blessing where she reminds us that the resurrection begins in the dark. where we cannot see. The tomb was already empty, Jesus already risen and gone when Mary Magdalene arrived to tend to his body. Jan Richardson reminds me of the paradox I have to hold with regard to resurrection or to just being human in general, that we carry 2 stones in our pockets. We are dust, and to dust we shall return, and that each of us is made in the divine image. Even when our world ends, when someone we love or something we trusted in dies or abandons us, life continues on whether we are ready for it or not. Grief and hope are grounded in this truth. We do not know in the moments of our deepest grief or deepest fear how we will be called back to life and what joy will look like if and when it does return. Because resurrection begins in the dark, but it still begins.